Welcome to the September 3rd meeting of the Urban Village Development Commission. We're going to go ahead and start the meeting with our meeting minutes from August 20th. I hope everyone had a chance to take a look at them. I know I did. I don't have any edits, but does anybody have anything they want to bring up? No? Okay, so let's go ahead and get a motion on those.
I move that we approve the August 20th minutes.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Carl Lee. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, passed unanimously. All right, let's move on. We're going to go right to the development agreement, and we're going to try and get through the rest of the appendices today, and then we'll have lots of time, hopefully, or we'll make time to go back. And I know that Lucy and team have made some have some responses to some of the things we've talked about, some edits and suggestions and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and move through. Where are we right now?
So we're ready for Appendix H, landscaping. That's where we stopped last time.
H, okay.
As Jeff said, we're hoping to get through the four other chapters that you've received. Part of the reason we're hoping to get through that tonight is we would like to provide you and the council with a revised draft for the next meeting. As Jeff indicated, we've been working on incorporating your comments. We've been meeting with some of the council committees, and we've gotten some comments from them. We've also been fixing all the references to other appendices, so it should read a little more smoothly. And just be aware, I don't think this is a surprise, but just to put it on your radar, that all the things that are shown legislatively as strikes and underlines in this draft have been accepted, and so you'll see a draft with new strikes and underlines showing what's been changed for this draft, for the draft you'll receive. If you see any typos, feel free to send us an email so we don't go through that. We're trying to catch those as well. There will be a time for public comment tonight. If anyone would like to comment, at the very end of this table, there's a public sign-up sheet, so feel free to sign up for that at the end of the meeting. And as we go through each of the chapters, we'll give Swedish an opportunity if they want to add something. So if you have something to add, you can. Public hearing?
Decision.
I'm sorry?
What's our decision on this? I thought we were going to remind at the beginning of every meeting.
Oh, I didn't know that we were going to do it at the beginning, but I'm happy to do it again. So we're reviewing a development agreement. The UVDC's role in a development agreement is to make a recommendation to the council, who are the ultimate decision makers.
Great. Thank you.
So Appendix H is landscape. Again, we started with Lakeside. It was the newest chapter, and we felt that we had incorporated some good additions, so we reused that one. Not too many changes to that chapter. Mostly we were eliminating the steep, there's that slope that was between the developed areas in the industrial area, and there was quite a bit of conceptual planting plans and details and things associated with that, and so those portions of the Lakeside landscape chapter were eliminated. But otherwise it's pretty much the same chapter. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Go ahead, Nina. Yeah.
Ready? Hello. I think I have this on. I had a question on, I think it's page 3, 5.1, where it says the street trees shall be determined by the master developer. And what I'm questioning is the phrase determined by, when really there's a lot in the agreement that determines street trees. And so I thought I'd ask, what is this really trying to say? What do they determine?
Well, I actually recommended in the next draft that you're going to get that it be something different.
Okay.
Because the existing streets are already part of the Issaquah Highlands Master Street Tree Plan, and that those streets should start with that. But that for other streets, especially privately owned streets, that if, for instance, the donut hole is broken up by circulation elements, and those elements include trees, the master developer, Swedish, could propose a different palette inside that block. If those are going to be publicly owned streets, the city would want to take a look at those and make sure that those are plant, whether that plant material is something that we consider appropriate near public paving, sorry.
So, just helping me understand, even if it's private, doesn't it still fall under the guidelines and standards that are put forth in this document, and as we had in Issaquah Highlands too?
Well, yes, and so in their, let's say they decided to propose conifers as their street trees, which would be probably not consistent with the neighborhood type they picked. So when they propose that as part of their master street tree plan, that would be the comment they would get back. So you're right, it's not completely out of thin air.
So let me just rephrase and now. I can say that, you're working on the language of this paragraph A, and I think it could just be wordsmithed to be more consistent, not say determined, because the rest of the sentence says that it has to still be approved. So perhaps even what you just said a moment ago, proposed by, or something like that, and that would help better define the role of the master developer.
Okay.
So that was my only question there. And then I had one more question. 10.3, just jumping ahead.
I'm sorry, say which one again?
10.3 on page
10.3.
9.
Yeah.
Fertilizer, herbicide, and pesticide use. And I wish I'd had the time to look back to the Issaquah Highlands standards as far as organic or, low impact stuff. And is this the same? This doesn't look like this has that kind of spirit to it. So I wondered how this is different from the current Issaquah Highlands standards, as well as fertilizer, herbicide, and pesticide. And I'm sorry, I do remember, though, that in the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement that it refers to the current code in the city code, doesn't it?
No, the current Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, it's in the groundwater standards, and it requires that they do things like inhibit their entry into the waterways, wetlands, and storm drains, that last sentence. But all the beginning stuff was not specified in the development agreement. It was in response to a performance standard that was included. And at the time, we spent a fair amount of time working with a specialist trying to figure out, how to give better direction. And so this is consistent with the with what's in there. Mostly it's in your homeowner's guide, and then also in the landscape management plans that are required. So I think the other things that sometimes come up are, it's not that they're always required to be organic, but they are often required to be slow release, so that you're getting it over time. And that language isn't in here, and we could definitely add that.
Thank you and for helping me with this, because I think there would be a lot of research to try to get that. But I think that this was more permissive or liberal than I would have expected in Issaquah Highlands. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Yep.
Chantal.
Yeah, I had the same concern about that section. Also, the plant selection. I didn't see anywhere any further restrictions. One could argue that ivy is a non-native plant that has adapted very well to what's the language, to the greater Issaquah region. Is there, I mean, I think there should be a list, if it's not somewhere else that I'm missing it, of plants that are not allowed under any circumstances, such as ivy, Scots broom, butterfly trees, you know, the type of, may not be completely, I mean, some of those are invasive and some of those have invasive tendencies and may not be listed as such, but.
So we don't have a list. I think we generally rely on the King County list, partly because it evolves over time. So if we put it in the development agreement, it couldn't evolve over time. You know, for instance, butterfly bush wouldn't have been a prohibited plant when Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement was adopted, and it is now. So, and Scotch broom, as much as we may choose to prohibit it, isn't listening. But what I'll do is look and see what kind of language, if we can reference that King County
That probably
list.
would be, because I'm familiar with that list, and it is a pretty good list.
All right.
Good catch, thank you. Anybody else on the landscape plan, or the landscape appendix?
Eddie's White Wonder and Lakeside as
Yeah, I
well.
was wondering about that.
Every development agreement
Can't
has
believe we missed
referenced
that before.
Eddie's White
I
Wonder.
was thinking the same thing.
It is the tree of Issaquah.
It is. Okay, anything else on the landscape appendix? No? Okay.
So before we start signs, a few more people have arrived, and I just want to let you know that we will be taking public comment at the end of this meeting. So there is a sign-up sheet at the end of the table, and feel free to sign up if you want to make comment.
Thank you.
No.
So sign standards, this we have, some of you who have been on the commission for a while will remember we spent a lot of time with rallies working on the sign code. The original Issaquah Highlands sign code was a big push for the city in terms of updating the sign code. And when we got to the Rallies Development Agreement, we recognized that we had learned certain things over the years, and also the Rallies' involvement with commercial properties really provided us with a lot of feedback on what had worked and not been working for businesses. So we significantly updated the sign code, excuse me, and then used that for Lakeside, and Issaquah Highlands has adopted it. It is pretty much what was adopted for the Central Issaquah Plan too. And the goal has been to try and create for the urban villages in the Central Issaquah area a kind of unified sign code. There'll be a couple of AMMs that have happened that will get incorporated in. I realize they weren't in here. And the infrastructure committee of the council has asked that we remove the automobile sign section. Gas station. I meant automobile service stations, but thank you. Because that isn't allowed use. Of course, just because it was in the sign code would make it allowed use, but I think they just thought it was clearer to remove that section. Just in the same way that we clarified the signs for really tall buildings, which I'm blanking on the name of, that was removed for Lakeside and Issaquah Highlands. So those are the only sort of updates I have from what you see before you, and I'm interested if you have any additional comments or thoughts.
I'm sorry, did somebody raise their hand there?
Okay.
Stephanie, go ahead.
I know there's different requirements for signage on hospitals. How far down does that extend to other types of medical buildings, whether they be urgent care, or is it only strictly hospitals that have different, you know, the signage must be seen from further away and lit to different standards, or are there other medical facilities that have that same sort of difference that may come into play for this?
So the Swedish is only requesting, I think, medical office. I don't think they're asking for an expansion of the hospital. And so I think we've addressed all those sign issues. But if for some reason something came up, What we have done is, and maybe that would be worth noting in here at the very end, is that as a essential facility, we did a modification for them based on them being an essential facility. And so, we aren't interested in making many of those sign changes available broadly.
Okay.
But we worked with them to identify what they thought were the most critical kinds of signs and sort of methods of messaging so that people could find their way. And we're still talking about some additional ones, because as different facilities come online,
Block review
they're
and
still
so
learning
forth.
things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes, Carl.
Lucy, on page 6, 2.37, I was curious, is it a specific, why is it franchise signs and then there's no retail or no restaurant as sign types? I mean, franchise means one specific thing to me, but,
It means something else here.
okay, that's what I was
So I'm glad
asking.
you asked. So if you see that little example there, the Michael's Bicycles is not the franchise sign part. The Mountain Cola is the franchise sign part.
Oh.
So if, for instance, another well-known cola, you know how they sometimes do signs for businesses, and then they have their logo as part of the sign? That's what we mean by a franchise sign. So it's a very particular kind of sign. It doesn't come up very
Okay.
often.
Thank you. So, I spent some time really looking at the Highlands from I-90, both during the day and at night, and I was trying to picture, where these buildings might be if they were at maximum height and so forth. I couldn't tell exactly, but I'm just wondering if there was some way we could get some sort of a graphic or rendering, maybe even a photo from, I don't know, I don't want anybody to stop on I-90 and take a picture of, but just to get a sense of, if they do in fact go to maximum height, what that visibility might look like from off-site in particular. I suppose we could look at it from the east as well.
So I had a feeling this might come up. Do you want to can you give me a little more sense of what your concern is or what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest, so let me just state first off that I am of the mind that what we're doing in the Highlands, what we've done in the Highlands so far isn't a blight on the hill. I actually think it looks quite nice. I was looking at it the other night on the road, and it's actually, the lights are pretty. It's just not a dark background. I guess what I'm most concerned about would be something sticking out. Really, I mean, there was one thing that I saw as I was driving. There was quite a bright light, and I couldn't figure out what it was that I was seeing, and I still don't know what it was that I saw, but it didn't seem to fit the rest of the sort of, if I could use the term, character of the rest of the lights on the hill. And that's the stuff that really sticks out and doesn't seem to fit is the stuff that would concern me. And if we have, an 80-foot building and a very bright sign up there, what would that look like from off-site? That's probably my biggest concern.
So the two things I think of, one is that I think there's something in here that limits signs to 65 feet. And I forgot to look that up, but I remember when I was reading back through this that's in here. Let me look in one
It does
place.
sound vaguely familiar, but I don't remember if it was here or if it was Rowley. But if it was on Rowley, it would probably be here too, right?
Oh. What?
2.46.
Well, that doesn't limit it. I think,
from the building bridge to the highest point of the sign.
So I will find that.
Okay.
The other thing I'm thinking of, Jeff, is I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that you're thinking about this at night when lights are on.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking that maybe we should look at the lighting section for signs, and that maybe there's something that needs to be added in there that would provide better guidance. You know, because sometimes it's hard to anticipate these ahead of time.
Yep.
Now, I've seen the light that you're talking about, and it's not the ballpark. There's like a bright light, and I'll see if I can identify
Yeah, I
it.
can't figure
I
out
just
what
saw
it
it, and I didn't, I just
And
passed
it's not
by
the
it.
mini storage.
It wasn't
Yeah.
the movie theater, I
For
know
sure.
that.
But this one, I think, is
It, you know,
something other. I'll
I
look
don't
at
think it was related to construction, so I don't, but I actually don't know what it was.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about, Carl? Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, so let's look at the lighting section, and I'll also next time figure out where the piece that I'm thinking of that I
Okay.
can't quite.
I have a quick question.
Thank you.
So, I don't know if this comes under this or not, say the spotlights, say they have a premiere, something's going on, and I've already seen where the spotlights were flaying around the skyline. Would that go anywhere in here at all? That sounds like temporary, kind of thing.
So they're prohibited except in association with, like a grand opening.
Okay.
And you would have to get a special permit identifying all the different kinds of signs and grand opening event
Now-
activities.
For a grand opening, is there a time limit? Because I notice like sometimes people use the word new for quite a long time.
Going out of business.
So
you're
that would be
lim-
part of the permit process, obviously, right? And
Right, it's limited to 30 days and no more than one in a 12-month period. Now, that does not mean that we would allow you necessarily
Sure.
to have those lights up for 30 days.
Yeah.
It would just be, that would be the longest period
Okay.
that we could allow it.
all right, thank you, Lucy.
Is that the
And-
duration, or is that the time, from the time that somebody actually opens to the time that so it's the time frame in which they can use it as opposed to a duration of time?
It's not like you could take 30 days and spread them over the year.
No, I guess what I'm asking is if a store opens on April 1st, do they have until April 30th to use that, as opposed to the duration of 30 days, in the middle of May through the middle of June?
For instance, Regency is not going to have their grand opening until later in the fall, I think.
Okay.
And so, within reason, it doesn't, if you open your doors on the 1st.
Yeah, but that's not
you
what the
would-
30 days is referring to right now.
No,
Okay.
it could, you would have to have something that qualified as
Right.
grand opening.
Right.
The other thing is if in section 516, there's a special or one-time event. I don't know if we would allow spotlights in association with that. But those kinds of events also have the same kind of special review and sometimes more flexibility.
Yeah, and I guess I would say as an event producer, I wouldn't want to see those that limited, because those can be very valuable tools for something like that, as long as it's permitted and, and understood what those limitations are. But I'd hate to see that not be allowed.
Right.
Because they can be very valuable
it's-
tools.
Right,
Yeah, okay,
okay.
thank you. Dinah, do you have anything on signs?
No, thank you very
Michael,
much. though.
Tim, Eric, Chantal? No? Are we good to go on signs? Anything else from you?
I forgot to ask Swedish with
Yeah.
landscaping or with signs, any comments? Okay.
Okay.
All right. The next section is lighting. Again, we started with Lakeside, since it was our newest. And also, we had worked with our lighting consultant to consider things like what changes we needed to make to the lighting chapter that we developed with Rowley, because it was on a hill. And so that seemed appropriate in this circumstance as well. And I think as Stephanie probably noticed, It's been separated from the guidelines and put into its own chapter. And part of that is because a portion of it is standards and a portion of it is guidelines. And we thought it was kind of confusing to have standards in a guidelines chapter. So we've made it a separate chapter of the development agreement. And really, there weren't a lot of changes. We eliminated sections on critical areas and updated the street types, but that was pretty much it.
Can you remind me, if I'm looking at page 2.0, neighborhoods is struck and areas is written in. Can you remind me what is considered an area in this case?
Well, an area, since it's not capitalized, it's not a defined term. I think the reason that we struck neighborhood is because there's just one neighborhood. It's
Right.
not like Lakeside or Raleigh that had multiple districts or neighborhoods. So, that was just, we weren't trying to do a defined term. We were trying to describe an approach that the master developer might choose.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure how I feel about that because it doesn't really tell me anything other than, I mean, streets tells me something, neighborhoods tells me something, but areas that isn't defined doesn't really tell me anything. So I don't know if that's a building, a block, the whole thing, or what, but, so I don't know, maybe some thought
Okay.
around that. I don't have a remedy or a
Okay.
suggestion, but I'm just curious. Thank you.
Would zones be more,
Well, I don't know how, I mean,
because I get what you're trying to imply. but I
yeah.
don't know what the
Well, I think
precise wording
areas,
is.
yeah, I think areas as a term is fine, but I don't know that it refers to anything else that we're doing here, right? So what's considered an area when they're developing this project? Because over time, I mean, I'm assuming that these things will probably not be built all at once.
Would it be better if it said like sectors or something? I mean, you could strike the word areas, but I don't think we're trying to encourage that each street have a different lamppost, for
right.
instance.
I mean, I wonder if project, application, I don't know, something where if something's being defined, whatever that thing is being defined, that we use that same terminology.
I was gonna say, but then again, I see reason for having it separated. Say, if they wanted a continuity from one existing area to a new area, it may not be appropriate for the new area, but it's already existing in the existing area.
Mhm.
So if you called like if you have areas, then you can kind of do what you want
Mhm.
without worrying that there's a sense of continuity over the whole project. Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming they're not gonna replace lighting in the existing uses.
Right.
And the new uses may not have a lighting required or permitted that's consistent with what's already there necessarily.
Right, but an area could be a parking lot
Yeah,
as a part of a larger project. And so all I'm
Yeah.
saying is, I actually don't really care what the term is as long as it relates to something else that we're referring to, I guess,
Well, and I guess the challenge is that we don't know exactly how this is gonna play out, and that might be something that comes up if we do a master site plan. For instance, they might choose to have the hospital be distinctly different than the donut hole. They might choose that each quadrant of the donut hole be different and that the community space be the unifying element if it was in the middle of the block, for instance. And so I guess this is, although it's under standards, what it's really saying is that it should be a consideration how you pick light fixtures and color and temperature to define this, that it will impact people's perception. But it's not specifying, it's saying that it should be an overt decision, but not what that decision should be.
Okay.
Oops.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
My turn?
Okay.
Okay. Lucy, back to basing my questions on page 4, where section 2.2 is talking about bug standards. And I just need your help in remembering how we have a, when is a full cutoff required and when is it not? And especially on I'm thinking about especially in the hills, and we may have done things other ways before, but when we're talking about uplighting that can be of a value 3 or 4, that doesn't seem to be meeting our objectives of having no uplighting.
So we spent a long time talking with Denise with this, so for instance, you can see under bug, it says for street lighting, the use should be equal to 0. And for other lights, there are sometimes benefits in terms of, if, for instance, if you use bollards, having one of the downsides of bollards is that you can't, they don't tend to light people's faces, and therefore people don't feel as safe, and so some uplighting may be appropriate. We started to change some of this. There are full cutoffs specified elsewhere in the standards. And what I need to do is go back and talk to Denise about that, because it's clear that on circulation facilities, I believe, it says no, that it should be full cutoff. But for instance, that isn't in parking lots, which seems like a really logical place that it would be full cutoffs. So we're trying to explore some of this for the next draft to clarify it, because you guys brought it up, which was helpful because it made us go look. Although one of the things that I went back to double check, Denise and I had quite a bit of conversation about how much we needed to change the lighting being on a hillside. And I think because the way fixtures are now with shields and various, they're not filters.
Shutters.
Yeah. There's
Baffles?
Sure, that's not the word, but thank you. I appreciate my crowdsourced thesaurus here. She was not as concerned about that on the hillside with Lakeside, and we went back and forth a lot because I know that was a concern. So let's just say that I'll go back and check in with her about the uplighting and the full cutoffs. I think that because of some of the tools that are available, the lights are different than they were when we just simply said everything has to be full cutoff. And I need to go back and update my memory banks.
And if I could, I don't know if this would be 100% true, but if you think about, what is it, the fourth one over here, the acceptable in the most urban plaza areas. Do you see that? I'd say in most urban plaza areas.
That's crazy.
I think about that, and I can see how that would be appropriate, but it seems to me that uplighting would probably have some sort of a height limit, so you wouldn't want to start uplighting any higher than, I don't know, some number of inches or feet off the ground. And again, I don't know if that's 100% true. I don't know if there are instances in which uplighting makes sense at a higher level, but do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And so, for instance, that fourth one over that says acceptable in the most urban plaza areas, that actually, I think I know this fixture, it actually has a solid lid. And the light is going up and bouncing back down. So you have some uplighting just because it's not fully enclosed on the sides, but it is not projecting up through the top.
Yeah, I suspected that, but I'm just trying to think, that I don't know that there would be any point would it be acceptable to start uplighting, at a point that's higher than, I don't know, some number, because then you would see it from a further distance offside. It wouldn't necessarily meet it wouldn't help the safety requirements that you're referring to, and that sort of thing. It would just seems to be overkill, actually, in my opinion.
Well, and we don't usually allow any uplighting on the buildings. For instance, Regal, it was important to them to have some light washing down the walls, washing the walls, because otherwise it's just black above the canopies. And we required all of that to be washing down
Right.
and not washing up.
Right.
So a lot of times it doesn't preclude something, it just means you have to do it in a less common way.
Okay,
So
okay,
we'll talk about this more with her.
okay.
Can I continue on that?
You may.
Thanks, Jeff. That's exactly what I was thinking, too. Just as you were saying it, if there was these uplighting values of 3 or maybe even 4, if we have to, would be allowed only up to certain height fixtures, because, as you said, they're intended for pedestrian scale or whatever it is. And,
So all the fixtures are limited to 15 feet.
well, that's plenty high for you to see my face.
Even
Even on my high heels, yes.
Well, was it I'm sorry, I thought you were asking, was there a limit on how high the fixtures could be?
Jeff, I think, was saying that could there be a separate limit on ones that have a higher value uplight?
That's what I'm saying, so if you,
Have a lower height limit
Yeah.
on ones with uplighting, with any uplighting?
and again, probably talking to Denise Denise, right?
Right.
Yeah, it would be good to talk to her about that, because there might be an instance that I'm not thinking about where that, we don't want to put a restriction where it doesn't need to be, but I can't think of it.
That sounds so simple. Okay, my other one, going backwards, page 3, illumination level standards. The definitions here are of minimum illumination, and one of the problems that I've experienced in Issaquah Highlands, and you were saying how lights have changed so much over time. We don't have a maximum. And is
So
there a
there
reason for
is a
that?
maximum because you have an average to minimum ratio. But, let me take a step back for a second. Part of the reason that we had Denise provide these illumination level standards was that the handbook that they rely on, is it $1,600? It's not cheap to access it. The idea is that for most projects that happen in the master plan community, they would have a lighting designer, and the lighting designer would actually use the Illumination Engineering Society of North America standards. But the idea behind providing this chart is if you have a small project, it may not be economically viable to hire a consultant, or your consultant might not have that handbook. And we felt it was necessary as a public document that was regulating it, that we made it available to smaller entities that might be having to design.
Yeah, and it's been a really great tool. I'm glad for its introduction whenever it came in Rowley or wherever we first saw it. So in that international design standard, the city of Issaquah may prefer to have lower illumination levels than somewhere else because it's a intermountain little place that is preserving its character for the natural environment around it, or whatever it is. So if all we're taking is a page out of the book of the international standard, it would be nice to know whether that's not too bright for us.
So I'm relying on our consultant, and I guess what I have to say is that Denise has been, we've been working with her for, you remember when we did the park and ride? Okay, that's when we started working with Denise, so maybe 10 years. And, I guess because of my experience in working with her, I'm hesitant to try and put maximums on.
These values are
Hey, Dan, you're not in a microphone. Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to repeat what he said?
Well, I believe what he said was that that the table in 2.1 is about half of the levels that are used in the manual. In typical cities.
So I think you said that the methods were used, but the values were half. Thank you very much for that.
Anything else, Nina? No. Okay, Stephanie?
Just one other quick clarification question. Whose responsibility is it necessarily to monitor, you have a development agreement here, and then you have the Lakeside Development Agreement over here, and Issaquah Highlands over here. When someone starts building and you kind of know what's going to go in around them, whose responsibility is to say, okay, well, you're going to have 4-story townhomes next to you eventually, that you should use this kind of lighting? Does that kind of conversation come up in the city review of things, knowing what the potential uses are in the neighboring properties, even though they're under different development agreements?
So are you thinking, Stephanie, that the way you might light a medical office building might not be compatible with a residential project, for instance?
Well, say they put in a medical building next year, but you know that 4-story residential townhomes are gonna go in within 3 years next door. Do you plan the lighting accordingly, or is it just kind of, okay, this is what's here now, we plan for what's here now?
Well, I guess I'm thinking that the lighting in general is designed for an urban environment in which you're trying to light to a safe yet fairly low level.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't think that it would be likely to be incompatible.
Okay.
I'm cycling through a couple of different scenarios in my head, and I haven't come up with one that.
Well, I was thinking specifically Lakeside, because that may not happen for 20 years, then
Right.
again, it could happen in 2 years.
Right.
So, do you light for what's there now, or do you light with?
Well, most of what you're lighting, or what we're regulating in terms of lighting, is external lighting, and most of that is therefore at the first story. We do ask them to take into consideration internal lighting, but most of that doesn't. There's not a lot of spill, and it's not consistent. So I'm not really, I'm not thinking of a scenario that concerns me where you would
Okay,
have
so it
two
doesn't seem to be
uses
a
where
big issue.
their levels were so incompatible that it would be a problem.
Okay.
I think it's a good question, though, because I've had the same questions around things like roads and parking, recreational spaces, that sort of thing, because, on the one hand, we may not know what's going there, but we know that it's zoned for residential, or it's zoned for retail or commercial or whatever. But on the other hand, if we took everything as an individual, this block here, who knows what impact we're creating on the future neighborhoods. And so I know there's several times when we have talked about, a community and say, okay, well, what's going on this block? What do we think is going to happen here? And sometimes we have the information, and sometimes we don't. But I do like the question, because we should all be thinking that way, I think, even though we might not have all the answers. But yeah, I don't think I'm very concerned in this case, because I agree. I think that the standards are fairly mellow in the case of having a major impact on a community, a block away, or half a mile away, or whatever. Lakeside in particular, it's not going to be that close. But what's happening on the Microsoft project is, so we don't know what's happening there. So that might be a bigger question. If what happens on the Microsoft project, how does that impact West Highlands Park? How does that impact Lakeside if they're not being built yet?
Well, so one thing that maybe will give you a bit of comfort is that streets are not lit based on their land use. They're based on the travel speeds and volumes and things like that. So the street classification sets the level. So it's more about what's happening behind the curb, and lighting levels. And generally, we're lighting to a fairly low level, except in whatever way you need to light, say, entrances to draw it, to make the environment more legible and help, so it's not just so uniform that you don't know where entries or stairs or things are, places where you need to pay more attention.
Michael?
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Lucy, I have a question about internal illumination. Swedish has a beautiful glass wall that's like 4 stories tall. Are there any limits on how much, and you did talk about it briefly, how much light can come out of a design like that?
Well, so the way this is written is we're asking for it, so we asked for a photometric plan. So, and we asked that to be a comprehensive photometric plan. So we're looking at all lighting sources. Now, how much that takes into account internal illumination, I think if there was a special wall like that, we might, question how it was reflected in the photometric plan, but generally I don't think we get a lot of benefit externally from the internal illumination, but we do ask for it.
And yeah, and it's a good question too. I'll share my opinion again because I never do that. I actually think sometimes that's what can add to the beauty of the hillside, at night or whatever. If you look at under 3.6.6 on page 14, that image, the light emphasizes the architecture. That kind of thing to me adds to the beauty, I think, and doesn't take away from the beauty, as opposed to just a bunch of lights. I think so. So I think if it's done properly, like Swedish has done a really nice job of making it very pretty. I think it can add value. So, but I guess each one of those would be looked at individually, right?
Well, and that's a good point. We brought this up last time, but I'm not sure if all the commissioners were there, so I'll repeat it, which is that the ambulance bays have to be lit to operating room levels. They're not lit to that level all the time, but there's a button that they can hit, and I think it takes it to something like 40 or 50-foot candles, which is just, like a really overlit parking lot's 10. So this is really exponentially greater. But of course, if you're having to operate on someone out in an ambulance, you want it very well lit. And I think Swedish did a good job of looking at materials and providing solid walls and sort of strategically positioning this space so that, for instance, from Squawk Mountain, they tried to minimize how much that light could spill out of that area and make it into a, sort of football stadium glow. So, there are certain things like pools and ATM machines that have pretty high levels that are required by law. And then there are other things where there's more discretion and we get to rely on the lighting standards. So, it's kind of a collaborative thing based on the design at the time, but what we're really trying to do is set up a good expectation about those lighting levels so that we have the tools to help them understand what the community expectation is, which is, I think, what you're trying to bring up.
Okay. Chantal, did you have anything? Eric? Tim? No?
Did you have anything you wanted to add? There's not a lot at the end on page 15 about sign guidelines, and I didn't know if there was something that you might want to add there, Jeff.
No, I was thinking about that, No, I mean, somebody brought up something to me the other day. They were surprised about Zumi's sign. And, they thought it was a little out of character to the community. And I went back and I looked at it myself, and of course I didn't do measurements on it, but I was trying to think back to the guidelines and so forth. And I believe it's within, I'm assuming, and I believe it's within the guidelines. I don't think I think it was really more a question of protruding as opposed to the location or the size of it.
Okay.
And so it made me wonder, are there ways It didn't bother me when I first saw it, and I'm not sure it bothers me now, but it made me wonder, was there a way for them to sort of take advantage a little bit of the situation and maybe bring it out a little bit further? I don't know if there's any guideline to say, but your sign has to be this side and that side, and it can only be on this side of the building. You can only have one of these, and it has to be this dimension. But it doesn't say that you can't stick it out so far. They happen to be on a corner, so maybe they're not protruding onto the sidewalk per se, but they're right out the entrance of the corner. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm referring to, right? So again, I'm not making a complaint or anything. Somebody did ask me about it. It made me just curious about it.
I was just going to look at this, what we had under signs in the guidelines as well.
And I guess to bring it around to Swedish then, or to this donut hole, is, could something like that happen? Let's say there's a pharmacy put on the corner somewhere, and could they set the sign in such a way that sort of goes against the guidelines to some degree, but really isn't technically against those guidelines? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The intent, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So you look into that?
Yeah.
Think about it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it's a problem, I just, you never know. But I don't have anything else on that page, no.
Okay.
Do you guys have anything? Michael?
No, but that does kind of lead me to a question here. When and this pertains to the greater view of these development agreements here, when we fill up the property to the east of 8th Avenue, we're going to kind of limit the visibility of Swedish from Highlands Drive. Will there ever be any discussion about an island sign out at that intersection to let people know what's back there?
So that's part of, I mentioned a minute ago that we were talking about signs, and we're putting something in the development agreement in the main body that allows off-site signage for wayfinding, because, there's always been buildings anticipated on blocks 25 through 27. But, as we said, the hospital's learning as they're going along, where are the challenges, what do they think are the key decision-making points, and we want to ensure that people can find their way, especially to the emergency room.
Sure.
And so we're talking with them now about certain kinds of signs that we're going to probably add along Highlands Drive.
Okay, and I think that might lead to Jeff's concern there about a sign that maybe is a little disparate from the rest of the design. So which development agreement would regulate that signage design?
Well, most of these are actually going to fall into traffic signs.
Okay.
In terms of some of the ones we're talking about. Other ones are, that's where having basically one unified sign code is good, because it's not different. So we're looking at having some of those wayfinding kiosks that we created for Raleigh that may include Swedish but would not technically be within the boundaries of their development agreement. So there's some of those kiosks, and then there's some kinds of traffic signs, for instance, potentially adding something to the pedestrian bridge at C Drive.
Okay. I got to use wayfinding with an official document at work the other day, so thank you. Just give you credit for that a year later.
I think what she's trying to say is they're going to put a big arrow with race with the traveling lines just left here.
Are the traffic signs like the H in a circle that are on the pedestrian bridge now with the arrow?
Right, but one of the things that we added with Raleigh, and I think it used to be something we really avoided, and we've since lightened up, and I think it was a good approach, is that certain informational and directional signs need the logo of the business associated with them, because it makes it more meaningful. So for instance, a parking sign that says this is parking for PCC or Whole Foods or something is more meaningful than just a parking sign. And so in the same way that an H that says Swedish as opposed to just an H may be more informational than just the most minimal logo. And so that's the kind of thing, especially as an essential facility, that we would be open. We are open and are talking about with them now.
Okay. Anything else on signs? Okay, let's move on to sustainability.
Sustainability. This chapter, we started with sort of the structure of Lakeside, on updating all the information. We have the tools, because Lakeside was going to be built over a number of years with many different kinds of neighborhoods, and one was going to be built in the next few years, and other one's going to be built much further out. It was not, the basic structure was useful, but some of the specifics weren't. And so the way this has been set up is with maintaining the kind of high level of sustainability that Swedish did in their first buildings, but then asking them to continue to stretch and grow that level of sustainability as they develop over time. And so there are, building to LEED Silver, and then having, an additional either leadership innovation and a technology innovation over the course of building out the rest of the project.
So I have a few questions. One is the reference to a funicular or gondola?
It's fun.
Yes.
So a funicular is a track that would go up the hill,
Right.
or a gondola is
Sort of
like the kind that's suspended, that
Like,
goes up
over
the
there,
hill.
like in Portland, for the medical hill they have there?
Exactly.
Okay,
And we know this is ambitious, and, what?
But feasible.
Well, as I said to them, in their hesitation, it is part of a list, so they're not required to do it. It is also in the Lakeside Development Agreement, and maybe there's an opportunity to partner, and you just never know what may happen over the course of a development agreement.
so in looking at these two sections, it seems like the spectrum of the options are very wide as far as cost. And I wonder if there's some effort could be made to sort of make it more uniform, in a sense, like, it just seems like they can go from a very low cost, and I don't mean Swedish in particular, but a lot of times, these guidelines go on to other developments. And so they can go from a very cheap option to a gondola, which is an extraordinarily expensive option. And so I'm just curious what it is in comparison to a cheaper option.
So, there was definitely an intent to have a
In
spectrum.
comparison to something cheaper.
The Office of Sustainability, in collaboration with Swedish and Keith and Dan and me, tried to come up with a list that was a range, because it's hard to predict. Some of these, it's hard to predict what the cost will be now, or even the feasibility of some of them now. And we wanted things that, the phrase I used was, would stretch and not break. And they are interested in stretching themselves. And so because of the uncertainty of some of these, we wanted to have a range. And I don't think they think of any of these as being easy.
Sure.
Now, funicular and gondola aside, I think they thought that this was a good range. So I'm not expert enough in all the different ones to speak to specific, comparability of various costs.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Michael?
Thanks. I'm being sustainable here, so I'm reading the one that's online, and looking at 3.4.1.
Uh-huh.
So it says, in addition to, halfway through there, in addition, the project will provide at least one. When we refer to the project, is that the overall Swedish property? So with the brief that they gave us kicking off this meeting, haven't they pretty much already met Delta,
Haven't they already met what?
D? The energy optimization strategy?
They have for the first building, but not for later buildings.
But if they were to build a regular building, the brief that they gave us was their energy was so good that almost they could potentially meet that without building to LEED Silver. So we're still going to have the entire project will be the energy sustainability metric, or is it?
Are you saying?
I think the point that Michael's brought up.
They could probably build a
No.
tent and meet the intent of.
Well, I think your point has been that that your understanding was that these were on subsequent buildings and not the buildings they've already built.
I'm fine either way, but I just want to be,
Okay, and
because I don't want us to have this image in our mind and then they build whatever they want and they can say, we already met D. I just want us to
So
be.
it's retroactive. is
Yeah,
what
I just
you're
want us to
saying.
be clear that what
Yeah.
we're agreeing to here. Because I think when you push sustainability too much, you're not sustainable because it costs a lot of money for everything. And to make that money, you have to spend resources. So we can have a very green item built in a building and you've wasted millions of dollars getting the money to pay for it. And it's not sustainable. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about what we're talking about here.
okay.
So.
Okay.
So a general comment about the section is whenever I see sustainable being used, I'm always looking for the triple bottom line approach of it. And I personally get very annoyed when sustainable is used instead of environmental. And I do see that a lot of the places where sustainable is used in that section are really just plain environmental benefits. Very few of those mention any social or economic benefits. And we could either change all the sustainable to environmental or try to find some cross-section, some of those that would have more of an economic or social benefits. And some of them are, when we talk about materials, sustainably harvested is definitely an environmental thing. But fair trade is more on the social or economic part of things. We're talking about the tools, and there too, I looked through the whole section and saw very little tools that addressed anything like, this is probably not the section to address low-income housing or things like that, but at least inexpensive transportation, anything that could help lower-income patients, so users of the facilities to access it more easily. So I don't have anything specific, but probably the only thing specific under tool was some kind of a connection to the park and ride, the first one, 3.1. It does mention the proximity to the transit center with the park and ride there, which I think I mentioned earlier. They still, to me, the proximity is not close enough to make it very usable for a lot of people. So some kind of a connection there would add to that economic or social benefits of it. But I would also try to, and probably the most exciting part of all of this was the reference to the gondola, which I think would have a great connective benefits for the whole city, and probably more sustainable than a lot of the other sustainable, triple bottom line sustainable than the other mentioned there.
So just to let you know that we've been talking with Swedish and we've reached, I think we reached agreement on some language that would go into the main body as a commitment on transit, not providing the transit, but participating and helping the city to leverage getting transit in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that the triple bottom line, I think we're, the city and Swedish agrees is an important thing, and this is more resource focused. I do think that some of the, things like the organic food and things do have they're not just environmental in their provision. But we'll, you know, and it may be that what we need to do, because, you know, some things make more sense in other chapters, and it's a question of how we introduce this to provide context so that that's a little clearer, how some of those are being addressed, but just aren't necessarily specified in this chapter, I guess, might be the way.
Go ahead, Eric.
Just one last real quick one. Section 341, Section C, it says up to 5% to generate measurable power for building. So up to 5%, I was curious, should there be more of a minimum in a sense? Because up to 5% would be like 0 to 5%. And, I mean, it's just being a little picky, but sorry.
Good question. I guess my only question on this is, and that probably open a can of worms, but incentives. You know, are there incentives to do more than the minimum? So, for example, you know, providing, if you look at 3.4.2, J, bullet J, provide electric vehicle priority parking and charging stations. To me, that's, you know, almost a given going forward, and that would be sort of the one sustainability innovation. I don't even consider it an innovation anymore as much as an opportunity. And there's probably no incentive to do, now, no other, you know, incentives beyond what, you know, they want to do anyway, to do something more than that. And so I don't know what those incentives could be necessarily, but it seems to me that, you know, building incentives into things like this, or maybe even taking out those things that are becoming more standard, and I'm not saying that it is standard yet, but by 20 whatever, it's probably going to be standard. You know, we might want to think about that.
So one of the, let me just make a note. Part of that, I think, is not reflected very clearly, but I think the idea is in the sustainability review, if something becomes standard practice, that it wouldn't necessarily remain on the list. The idea is to give us a regular opportunity to update the list.
Is that in here?
No, I was saying I don't think that's as clear as it,
okay.
as it has been, and so.
Okay.
So I think that's a good piece to go back and look at.
All right, thank you.
Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I
Michael.
wanted to address something Chantal said real quick. And first of all, I always agree with the incentives. I like that idea. It worked well in some of the other development agreements, but they were asking for more, I think, so it might be difficult here. I think Swedish, maybe we're not considering what Swedish is as an organization. We talk about extra social benefits to the community. They're a hospital, and they're a nonprofit hospital, so they have to serve everyone, regardless of their state or their ability to pay. So I don't think there is a more beneficial social construct than a hospital in this community. So I think they've met many of those. I really respect the notion, but I just want, again, to point that out because I think it's pretty valuable.
Yes, Eric. Thank you, Michael.
In line with the the suggestion that you had to offer incentives, I wonder if there's anything, like the gondola is a pretty exciting prospect, but I don't know if I would expect Swedish to take that burden on, and I wonder, I think I've done this in other development agreements, is somehow, you say incentive or some level of cooperation with the city, to maybe help, promote something like that, because that would be not just a benefit to Swedish, but a benefit to, I think, the entire community, to offer a gondola that would go from the floor to the hospital and also to that whole area up there, I just think it'd be nice to have some, to explore that in some fashion. Of course, that'd be outside of the purview of this agreement, but I just wanted to voice that.
Maybe we can get the city to suspend the trolley to go up and down the hill.
Well, true, or
Yeah.
you can do a combination trolley and gondola
Yeah.
ride, but
Okay. All
you
right.
can put on a voting, vote for it.
All right. Anything else on sustainability? Yes, Nina.
Of course. Thank you, Jeff. One part comes up in both the leadership innovation and technology innovation, the last item on each of those, it's G for leadership and K for technology. In the way that it's worded, it says or an equivalent innovation as determined by the designated official. Is that that the designated official is, right now it's you, Lucy, right?
It could be me. They get to request.
Could be somebody else.
It's the mayor who.
Yeah, and I was just seeing that as being, there is a big spectrum, there's a lot to choose from, but geez, you could just do anything as long as it's one of the person who has this sole responsibility. And I just wondered if there should be another kind of determined by and approved by. If we've set this up and said that we say that the leadership innovation could be earned by items A through F, and we as a body of the officials do that, but then it could entirely be done by somebody other than you as a designated official. It just seemed like there should be another checks and balances on going off the proposed plan. Not quite sure how to do that, but I was just going to suggest some kind of language for the last items, because it just reduces the weight of the list by saying, well, the list means nothing because you could just do something else.
Veto that.
Well,
outside
but it
of
doesn't
the-
say something else. It says something else
It's
that's
approved
equivalent.
by, yeah. But the designated official doesn't get the support, you could put it this way, of a body to say that this is the kind of thing that needs to be the alternative.
Right. but
Just,
one thing I noticed is that there's not a AMM section to this, which I think there probably should be. And, maybe in identifying what those criteria are, that would help.
Something, yeah.
Because every chapter can be modified.
Right.
And there are only certain things that the designated official can't modify. So, I think the choices are either this is elevated that it's the council. Any designated official worth her salt is going to talk to a lot of other people before they make this change.
And I just, the term of this agreement, though, might go out beyond your willingness to work for the city of Issaquah. So I'm just looking
Plan on
out for that,
retiring at some point.
for that day, for your consideration.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was kind of is thread throughout. One is that under 3.4.1, it says that it's an energy efficiency performance in all the development, blah, blah, blah. But then when we talk about performance, we say, for instance, under technology innovation, letter F, purchase green power for 2 years. And that's it. I have another complaint about that one. But performance, and then the other one, these aren't so performance, they're just incident-based. And the last point of this being item 4.2, the schedule, a sustainability review will occur within 1 year, but it doesn't say it'll ever happen again.
I think it's 1 year of a building being completed.
So then, what happens after that? And so what I'm thinking about is not something that we've ever done before, but the progression of sustainability movement is to something that performs rather than is built. Not quite sure how to approach it, but I'm looking at something that just has a more future.
So I can tell you the city does not want to be monitoring their performance on an annual basis. That's not something we're willing to take on, and I don't think it's something Swedish should be willing to undergo.
Yeah, well,
So,
that said, what about the incentive side of it? Something, I don't have an answer to it yet, I'm just looking for.
They're inherently incentives because they save money.
Right.
So I think we have to think about what our goals are. So part of it is to encourage getting out in front of a trend. And so part of the goal of these, we started with rallies, completely different sustainability structure, but part of what we started with the rallies was these reviews as a way of documenting the efforts that were made, not only so that, we all had an opportunity to understand what had been done, but to make information available to other entities about what had been done as a way of encouraging it, in the same way that the Idea House did at Issaquah Highlands. And so it's not to monitor their long-term performance, but to try and encourage taking a more leadership role rather than a follower role. Now, that said, I can't tell you the number of times that Swedish has reminded us, and so I will say it to you, they are a nonprofit, and so that they have to be able to demonstrate that making one of these choices is going to reflect positively in their bottom line, because their profit margin is not such as a nonprofit that they can do something just for show. And so it's trying to strike a balance between taking a leadership role and doing things that financially make sense.
Yeah, and for that, I do appreciate the language that has that a level similar to LEED Silver equivalency and not making a requirement on certification, because that's a diversion of resources that Swedish identified they did not want to do in the first one.
Right,
And I
and
appreciate
so
that.
the idea there is that they could choose to certify, but they aren't required to. Alex, did you want to add something?
Can you come to a microphone? Thank you.
Just emphasizing the point that this is all of our healthcare dollars, right? And so how we spend the money on sustainability will affect the programs that we can provide to the community. So being really responsible with our healthcare dollars is really important. So, but with that said, we also are interested in continuing what we've done with the first project. And, as I showed you guys a few weeks ago, we have demonstrated real energy conservation. We do believe we're probably one of the most energy efficient hospitals in the country, and we want to continue that.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, anything else on sustainability at this point? Okay, thank you, Nina. Thank you, Lucy and Commission. So just to, what's the latest on the SEPA? What's the timing on that?
I think that I was out last week. I think we may have gotten a draft. Yesterday.
Okay. And you'll summarize that for us going
Well,
forward, or next
What
meeting?
we've done in past development agreements is we have taken not the SEPA checklist, but conditions that come out of the SEPA checklist, and have put those into a chapter to clarify what conditions apply to the project and what the timing of those are.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'll just remind why don't we leave it there for one more minute?
I was going to pass it around, but yeah.
If any of the public would like to testify, please feel free to sign up on the sheet that we keep trying to grab.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
That's
catch you
okay.
out there.
I'm a highly distractible squirrel. What that chapter would represent, is what we need to know about SEPA to implement the development agreement. And, as this is an extension of the existing Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, I'm not sure exactly what will end up in there.
Okay, so nice job getting through all these appendices. What do we do it in 3 meetings, I guess?
Yeah.
3 meetings. So the next meeting that we have, which will be 2 weeks from now,
Yes.
we will get a new draft of this, or actually prior to the meeting, we'll get a new draft of it. So please look through all the red lines to the extent that you can, so that we can come here prepared to talk about those changes and see where else we want to go with it. So, meantime, I'd like to go ahead and open up the public comment portion of the hearing, or public hearing portion of the meeting, I should say. If there's anybody that would like to speak, I don't think we have anybody on the list, right?
I see no names on the list.
No names on the list. We have a lovely audience here tonight, but nobody wants to speak. Should we do open mic night? Does anybody want to sing? Or perhaps spoken word or interpretive dance? No? Okay. Well then, so then I guess I will close the public comment portion of the meeting.
Before Lucy starts to cry.
Yeah.
I won't cry, I'd be highly entertained.
Okay, well, there you go. All right, we have done very well so far. We
You
have
have.
time for open discussion. Anybody want to talk about anything relevant and germane, please? Unlike my,
Wow, the interpretive dance was about to come out there.
okay, Nina, bring it on.
Thank you, Jeff. Another outstanding question, or maybe I just wasn't here, but it popped up again in the letter of record from Council for Swedish in response to this Issaquah Environmental Council letter. So we read this, but there's this one part of it that I'd like to know more about. And like I said, if I've missed something, just give me some cliff notes. Their comment is,
Can you say who there is?
the comment is written by Council for Swedish.
Okay,
And Michael Robinson in the letter dated.
I wasn't sure if
September
you were
3rd.
referring to the IEC or
Yes,
to
no.
Swedish.
No, the Swedish letter. Were the development agreement not to be adopted, Swedish would be at risk of closing on the property without knowing what entitlement regulations would affect the property and how those entitlement regulations would be implemented. And it was a question that Jeff brought up a few meetings back. Well, what if we don't do a development agreement? And not only is that a question for this party, but for any of the other properties in Issaquah Highlands, and where'd we go with that? And how does this leave us when we think about the Marriott property or we think about the Microsoft property? That's what.
So I think we have, so the properties that aren't developed by, I think it's September 2017 is when the development agreement ends. They'll be kind of in a different boat than properties that are already developed. Those have uses and entitlement and certain kind of nature, and the city will have to decide what kind of regulations they choose to use on those things that have already been built. For any properties that haven't been built, that is an open question, and I think that's what Swedish is trying to identify is that they wanted more certainty than an unknown process. Saying that, though, you know, we've already begun talking with Port Blakely about what our choices are. You know, there's certain avenues we're pursuing. I'm going to go do some training next year to see if one of those avenues is worth using in the future. So it's not a question that we're waiting to 2017 to begin answering. We just haven't really decided which way to go yet. So I think we're in not a dissimilar position from the question that you're asking. Mm-hmm. What do we do with that when we reach the build-out period? We just don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, and what might be even more interesting or scary would be someone who's in the middle of a project, right?
Well, they could be vested, though.
Could be, but who knows what stage they'd be at, right? Maybe they've
Well, I think
purchased land, but they haven't, broke ground or whatever. I mean, it could be anything.
you're not vested by purchasing property necessarily.
Right.
I
No,
mean,
but in
usually,
the permit process, you get vested, right?
yeah, but not even necessarily through land use. I mean, and those are all legal questions that would, we would.
Okay, let me add for discussion's sake, Grand Ridge Plaza, for instance. That is built, but it's not built to its full entitlement. So if a party is asking that they don't know what the entitlement regulations, but those two words are together, I don't know if I quite understand that. And then in 2017, could even Grand Ridge Plaza be facing a redevelopment? What is the redevelopment definition for a property in a urban village zone that has an expired development agreement?
So, there are many questions there. One is, and we're working with Port Blakely now on clarifying for each of the non-residential properties exactly how much entitlement they have and whether they have retained any excess entitlement. Because the way some contracts are written is once you finish building your building, it reverts.
Oh.
So if you have 100,000 and you build 98, the 2,000 would revert. Now, there are lots of different contracts, and that's why we're trying to get clarity with them. Subsequent to the development agreement expiring, we don't know I mean, I don't know. I just don't have an answer for you exactly what would happen. I mean, I could hypothesize on lots of different alternatives, but I don't think that would be wise because I don't know which way we're going to go. And, I think as we get towards the end of the development agreement, if there are properties such as Marriott or Block 19, which is the one over by the pond across Falls Drive from Marriott, if those hadn't developed, we would definitely be wanting to talk to that property owner to try and clarify, what they want and how to move forward.
So if I could now.
So I mean, I guess this to me is outside of this particular development agreement in the sense that that uncertainty is exactly what Swedish is unappealing to Swedish, and which led them to this process, so that they had in purchasing property, there was clarity and predictability for both the city and the property owner, as well as Port Blakely in handing something off and to the community about what the options were and what could happen. And that may be, for a big piece of property like Microsoft, if someone wasn't going to build that out in the time frame, that might be a great solution as well. It's just hard to say not knowing what's going to happen yet.
Which brings me to the question of the duration of this particular development agreement that I've been wondering about. The latest letter that you're referring to refers to a 2033.
2033, yeah.
That date seems to be changing.
That's 30 years. When was the first one?
No. Originally, it was an extension of 10 years beyond the expiration of
So
the
to
development
27.
agreement, which would have given them a total of, I think, 14 years. And what they've asked for is 20 years from the signing of the development agreement. So that is maybe a 5 or 6 year extension beyond the draft you originally saw. But not like another decade or something like that.
So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know that I have a feeling one way or the other. I just wanted to bring that up because I find it interesting that it's been extended further.
There was a request for extension,
Yeah.
and you haven't seen a draft. I
Right.
mean, I think the city is entertaining it.
Yeah.
And if you have thoughts, we'd like to hear them.
I just read it when I got that letter today, so I haven't had time to process it. I just wanted to bring it up so that whatever questions we might have going forward, we can incorporate that thinking into it. If someone could remind me, what's the deadline for them to create those beds that they have outstanding? The beds, the
2014?
the deadline to create those additional beds?
So we have to,
You're on. You're on.
we have to license another 40 beds by October of next year, and that'll get us up to 120. And then we have to license the remaining 55 up to 175 by October 2018.
18, okay. Thank you. Okay, which I'll just go on record saying I think that that's really important, that we can get to that point if this goes through. I'm not sure. I'd like to understand a little bit better, why 20 years and not 14, and maybe it's just uncertainty in the marketplace or whatever, but it doesn't seem like, we've got a lot of other pieces of land in the Highlands that haven't been concerned with the 2017 date to begin with, that another 20 years, I don't know if that's excessive or not.
And was there rationale given for the request and the increase?
But I'll let Alex speak to that.
So when we were looking at this and thinking more about what we'd build, how much and when, it seemed less and less likely that we're going to build 539,000 square feet in 14 years. That's, a new building every about 3 years. And I just don't think we're going to grow at that pace. So, we have real reservations about growing and building buildings that sit vacant. So we personally felt a lot more comfortable 20 years. We feel like that would probably be more a realistic target to build out the 539,000 of development rights.
Okay, thank you. So that takes me to sort of back to what Stephanie said earlier, to some degree, about adjacent properties. I'd be really curious to know where we end up with, what's happening with the Microsoft property. 2017 is coming upon them as well. So if a new development agreement has to be written for that, or an extension has to be created, I'd really like to see some compatibility or some consistency across whatever these are. So, if someone from Microsoft came and said, no, we really intend to build here, but we need 30 more years to do it, I think we need to start asking those questions. I know that's not Swedish's problem per se, but I think we need to really think about that.
So just so you know the process, at the end of a build-out period, the development agreement, I think this is true for all of them, I know it's true for Issaquah Highlands, it doesn't automatically terminate. Either the master developer or the city can ask for it to terminate. The city would be likely to ask to terminate because probably primarily the stormwater standards have changed significantly over the 20 years, and that's been a really important piece for the city to update those particular standards. And so if there was a request to, for instance, continue for a long period of time, it would either be a major modification that would go to the council or another development agreement that came back to a commission. So, we would just, we don't know what's going to happen. Those are, you've probably identified, other than this property, Microsoft, Block 19, which is residential, and Marriott, which is Block 20. Those are, I think, the only substantial pieces left. There are single-family lots up in the Harrison neighborhood. But those, we would need to establish, basic setbacks and things like that, but because it's already been platted, there's really very little regulation necessary to address that. It's really these bigger pieces of property.
Okay. All right, food for thought for
I have
future
a
meetings?
follow-up
Yes.
on that. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing up the term of the agreement. And it goes back to something we were talking about earlier. It's great to be negotiating with an organization like Swedish because of what they're offering. And I understand that this agreement is between the city and Swedish, and that our development agreements go with the land, though. And if I'm understanding the language correctly, that if Swedish sold any of the property, that the development agreement would still apply.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And so we're looking at an expectation of some diversification within this property. Part of it will be hospital, part of it will be other things. And so when we're talking about a 20-year term and the unknowns, you have a lot of trust and faith when you're dealing with Swedish, but we do want to scrutinize an agreement that's going to be in effect with whoever the party is who may own that property. And, oh gosh, I'm sorry, to Jeff's, going back, it was such a good question, Jeff. I'm just keeping, what happens if we don't accept the development agreement? And the only answer we get is, well, I don't know. And it's the I don't know is why we have to have a development agreement. And we've lit a fire under a process to create a development agreement, but the same sense of urgency isn't matched by providing an alternative. There is no alternative, apparently. It's an awkward position to be in. And so I just come back to that. That seems so unsatisfying to say, well, if you don't accept this development agreement, well, gee, then I just don't know.
Well, right, and we're having this conversation because Swedish has requested this, but we could very well be having the same conversation if Microsoft came to us, right? And the same situation is upon us. The difference is we don't have a development agreement to talk about with that one. So I'm actually probably more concerned about what happens with that piece of land, as I've been for a long time, because someone never had the foresight. I started before I ever got involved, but even I never had the foresight to say, well, what if they don't build in a period of time? What if that land just sits there vacant? Nobody thought, sound guy's going, oh God. I don't think anybody thought something wouldn't be built there, and then if they decide to sell that land to somebody else, who knows, we could be starting a whole new process that's completely different than the one we're talking about right now. Mm-hmm. So I think that's my bigger concern. I'd hate to see this community go from all of this great work that we've done to make it all consistent and work all well together, and then all of a sudden end up at the 11th hour with 2 or 3 different, sort of new snap-on agreements that satisfy just the landowners in that case. I'm not saying this is a bad situation necessarily, what we're going through with this development agreement. I'm just saying beyond this one and the other 2 or 3 pieces of land that are left, I just concerned about the uncertainty around that.
Well, I think Swedish is concerned about the uncertainty around this, and that's why they've asked to do this. And I think, we're sort of seeing the impact of the recession. Because there are, to a certain extent, the time frame for the development agreement probably was reasonable if you didn't subtract 6 years out of it. Building had started back then, and it didn't. And so now we're trying to figure out how to provide predictability for property owners that we, I think as a community, want to have here. And I think that there may be larger discussions that happen with Issaquah Highlands, those properties that might remain within Issaquah Highlands that are undeveloped, and run out various scenarios in terms of zoning or tools that could be used to handle that property going forward. But that's probably almost more likely for someone where we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. This is a particular property owner asking for a level of predictability before they make a certain level of investment. And I think you can imagine what some of the alternatives might be.
Yeah, and I do understand the motivation, and it's totally reasonable. But as a decision maker, that's where it's unsatisfying. It's an ultimatum. Either you pick this development agreement, or, oh my gosh, I don't know. Could be any number of horrible things. I mean, it just doesn't give us a very good choice. That's all. Tim, oh good, help me.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I guess what I'm hearing is that we have a process that we've been going through. We've got a core here. We've made some recommendations, minor changes. I don't think that we've basically changed much from what the core was. One of the things that I don't think I've heard much of is I'm assuming that this development agreement as it was submitted was something that Swedish was on board with. And I'm also assuming that they haven't heard anything through these sessions that they would say, no, that's the final straw. We're not going to go through with this. We don't like that agreement. There seems to be kind of an inevitability, if you will, of, we are headed to approving this agreement. And if we don't, I'm not sure what's supposed to happen on December 31st, as far as Swedish is concerned. They want to close on the project, and they wouldn't if they didn't have some certainty as brought up by this. So I don't want to say it's inevitable, but it sounds like we've got something here that's it's not a far stretch from things that have been done before. And it looks like something that's doable. And again, I haven't heard any feedback from Swedish to say that they don't like any of the discussions that we've had about these little changes that we've been making. So I would hope that, we all feel pretty comfortable that even though we don't have an alternative, there's some things that you can look at and say, maybe we don't need an alternative. This isn't such a big stretch that we have to say, oh, we just don't understand what's in here, and we have to just back off on this whole thing and put it on the back burner. So.
Well, the point that you're bringing up, Tim, which I think is a really helpful one, is I think it isn't a binary decision that we're asking, or recommendation that we're asking the commission to make. It's not this, it's either this development agreement or nothing. Because we are having that discussion. We're building a partnership, we're building a set of tools that we think will create something that's worth having in the city. And so if we said the draft that we brought you a month ago, it's either that or nothing, then I would understand what you're saying. I think the important piece is that we are talking about lots of alternatives all through this document that are reflecting what kinds of tools and understanding of each other we need to have to feel comfortable moving forward together. And yes, we've been meeting with Swedish a lot. And that's why it's important to give them an opportunity to speak here so that you have an opportunity to hear from them. But we are, sometimes spending a long time on one page talking about a few words. And, that I think is the important piece of what happens, and I know has been really important for the commission, is building that partnership and having a sense of who that partner is that you're entering into this agreement with. Because it is for a number of years, and does it feel like someone that is ready to roll up their sleeves and work together to craft something both as a document and as a neighborhood built structure that isn't just theirs, but is, the cities and the residents as well.
If I can make a comment, one of them is sort of echoing Tim's point. We've been through 2 recent development agreement drafts to recommendation. If we put metrics against them, we were much farther apart when we started on both of those. So we've informed this one based on everything we learned. It's not drastically different. And I think we discussed during one of those if a development agreement wasn't in place and they would just go through a standard permitting process for each building. So there actually is an alternative built into this, right, if we don't have a development agreement?
Yes. The question is, that standard process is understood today through 2017. It's not, we're not sure exactly what happens when the development agreement comes to an end.
But places that's because they're under a development agreement now, and we're
Right.
extending. But the Raleigh and Lakeside didn't have
Right, for Lakeside's a good
existing
example.
development agreements, and we said, well, if we don't have a DA, then they'll just move to standard permitting processes.
Right. Right, so, or, for instance, they could have just done their 2-to-1 slope with a standard reclamation plan and not adding developable area.
It's not like there's nothing there.
Right.
Right, I think that's an excellent point, Carl, and Tim, your point as well too. And let me just be clear, I'm not personally concerned with the idea of a development agreement. I'm more concerned about the bigger picture. I think you brought a great point, Nina, about redevelopment. What happens if, if Regency Center wants to redevelop that area? What does that look like? And I'm very concerned about the Microsoft land, what's going to happen with that area. So let me be clear, it's not about, to me, this development agreement per se, and but it does open up a bunch of other questions because, in this case, we're talking about this, and Swedish has been proactive and smart about approaching this, but right now it makes everything else look even more uncertain. That scares me more than anything, I think. So,
And,
but thanks for all your thoughts.
and I want to thank Tim for for clarifying that it's not that we've been given, well, take this or don't take it. It has been a very collaborative effort, and I appreciate that. I was just trying to make sure that we address this initial concern that came up at the beginning of the process to see if we still felt like we were stranded. But I think that what you've said is quite true, that our input has been taken productively and constructively in the development agreement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, I thought we were really styling when we might have almost gotten out of here at 8:20.
Oh, then I had to really make a
So,
mention that one.
should I open up another topic, Emery? No.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I'll just leave it. Anything else? All right. So we'll go ahead and close this meeting at, I have 8:47. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And we'll be back in council chambers 2 weeks?
As far as I know.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.